The crystalline spires of the Aetherian Grand Palace pierced the lavender sky like frozen lightning, their surfaces reflecting the light of 3 setting suns. Princess Kira stood at the window of her private chambers, her iridescent skin shimmering with anxiety as she watched the human diplomatic vessels descend through the atmosphere. This wasn't just another routine meeting. It was the first major summit between the Aetherian Empire and the Human Alliance since the Great Siege 15 years ago. The memory of that terrible day still haunted her. She had been just a child then, barely 7 cycles old, when the Vorax invasion force had torn through their defensive shields like paper. The palace had burned, her people had scattered, and in the chaos, a stranger had saved her life. A human child, she'd always thought, though that had seemed impossible at the time. Humans hadn't been allowed on Aetheria then. They were considered too unpredictable, too dangerous. "Your Highness," called a soft voice from behind her. "The delegates are arriving." Kira turned to face her advisor, Lyra, whose translucent wings fluttered with barely contained excitement. "Thank you, Lyra. Is everything prepared in the Great Hall?" "Yes, Your Highness. Though I must warn you, the human delegation has sent someone unexpected. Their chief diplomat is quite young by their standards, a Marcus Chen." Something about the name sent a shiver down Kira's spine, though she couldn't explain why. She smoothed down her ceremonial robes, the fabric shifting colors like oil on water. "Young can be good, Lyra. Young means fewer prejudices, more openness to change." As Kira made her way through the winding corridors of the palace, her guard detail falling into step behind her, she couldn't shake the feeling of déjà vu that had been plaguing her all day. The memories of the siege felt closer than they had in years, more vivid. The smell of plasma fire, the sound of shattering crystal, and the warm hand of her savior pulling her to safety. The Great Hall was already filled with delegates when she arrived. Tall, elegant Aetherians with their rainbow-hued skin and gossamer wings, mingling awkwardly with the more solidly built humans in their formal diplomatic attire. Kira took her place on the raised platform, preparing to give the welcome address when she saw him. Marcus Chen stood near the center of the human delegation, his dark eyes scanning the room with an intensity that seemed at odds with his diplomatic role. He was young, perhaps 30 by human standards, with features that spoke of Earth's Asian ancestry. But it was his posture that caught Kira's attention, the way he held himself, alert but relaxed, like a warrior trying to appear harmless. As she began her speech, their eyes met across the crowded hall. The words died in her throat as a memory slammed into her with the force of a gravitational wave. Those same eyes, younger but just as intense, looking down at her as strong arms lifted her over a fallen beam. The smell of smoke, the sound of fighting, and a child's voice saying, "I've got you. You're safe now." Kira forced herself to continue speaking, years of diplomatic training taking over while her mind raced. It couldn't be him. It was impossible. The human child who saved her would be the same age as Marcus now, but surely this was just her imagination playing tricks on her. But as the formal ceremonies proceeded, she found her attention drawn back to him again and again. The way he moved through the crowd was familiar, too familiar. And when he finally approached her platform to present his credentials, she noticed a small scar on his left hand, just below the thumb. A scar that matched her memory perfectly. "Your Highness," he said, bowing deeply. His voice had changed with age, but something in its cadence struck a chord in her memory. "On behalf of the Human Alliance, I bring greetings and hope for a lasting peace between our peoples." Kira's heart thundered in her chest as she extended her hand for the traditional greeting. As their fingers touched, she felt a jolt of recognition that couldn't be denied. The texture of his skin, the warmth of his touch, it was the same hand that had pulled her from the ruins of her burning home all those years ago. "Welcome to Aetheria, Diplomat Chen," she managed to say, her voice steady despite her inner turmoil. "Though perhaps this is not your first visit to our world." Something flickered in his eyes, Surprise, recognition, and something else she couldn't quite read. His response was diplomatically perfect, yet she could hear the weight of unspoken truth in every word. Every visit to Etheria is like seeing it for the first time, Your Highness. Its beauty never ceases to amaze. As he moved away to rejoin his delegation, Kira's mind was spinning. The human child who had saved her life had somehow grown up to become a diplomat, worked his way into a position that would bring him back to her world. Back to her. But why? And how had he managed to keep this secret for so long? The rest of the evening passed in a blur of formal introductions and carefully worded pleasantries. Kira performed her duties flawlessly, but her attention remained fixed on the puzzle that Marcus Chen represented. She watched as he navigated the complex social hierarchies of her court with surprising ease, showing none of the awkwardness most humans displayed around her people. As the first day of the summit drew to a close, Kira retreated to her private gardens, needing space to think. The 3 moons of Etheria cast their gentle light over the crystalline flowers, making them chime softly in the evening breeze. She had spent 15 years wondering about her mysterious savior, imagining what might have become of the brave human child who had risked everything to help her. Now he was here, standing in her palace, carrying credentials from the Human Alliance. It couldn't be coincidence, but what did it mean? Was he here simply as a diplomat, or did his presence have a deeper purpose? And most importantly, did she dare to confront him about their shared past, or would doing so unravel the delicate diplomatic balance they were trying to achieve? As she gazed up at the star-filled sky, Kira made her decision. She would watch, wait, and gather evidence. If Marcus Chen was indeed her childhood savior, she needed to understand why he had chosen this path, why he had spent years working his way back to her world. And if he wasn't, if this was all somehow a product of her desperate wish to finally thank the person who had saved her life, then she needed to know that too. Either way, she had a feeling that this summit was about to become far more interesting than anyone had anticipated. The days following the opening ceremony were filled with a flurry of diplomatic meetings, each one bringing Kira into closer contact with Marcus Chen. She watched him during the negotiations, studying the way he carried himself, the careful precision of his words, and the subtle hints of military training that showed through his diplomatic veneer. Every observation seemed to confirm her suspicions, yet raised new questions. During a particularly tense debate over trading rights in the Outer Rim, Marcus demonstrated an unusually deep understanding of Aetherian customs. He didn't just know the formal protocols. He understood the underlying cultural significance, the unspoken meanings that most outsiders missed. When an elder counselor became agitated, Marcus diffused the situation with a traditional gesture of respect, so obscure that even some younger Aetherians had forgotten its meaning. "Your knowledge of our ways is remarkable, Diplomat Chen," Kira said afterward, as they walked through the palace's floating gardens. Crystal flowers chimed around them, responding to their presence with subtle changes in color. "One might think you would spend years studying our culture." Marcus's step faltered slightly, so briefly that anyone else might have missed it. "I've always been fascinated by Aetherian culture, Your Highness. Understanding each other is the first step toward lasting peace." "Indeed," Kira replied, noting how his hand unconsciously moved to touch the scar below his thumb. "Though sometimes I wonder if we understand ourselves as well as we think. Take the Great Siege, for instance. There are still so many unanswered questions about that day." The garden's crystalline wind chimes tinkled in the breeze, filling the silence that followed her words. Marcus's expression remained diplomatic, but Kira could see the tension in his shoulders, the slight change in his breathing pattern. "The siege was a tragic event," he said carefully. "Many lives were lost, and many heroes went unrecognized." "Yes," Kira agreed, stopping beside a fountain that sprayed luminescent water into the air. "Including a young human child who somehow managed to be in exactly the right place at exactly the right time to save a frightened princess." Marcus turned to face her, his dark eyes unreadable. "Your Highness, I..." Before he could continue, alarms began blaring throughout the palace. Red warning lights pulsed through the crystal walls, and guards came running from all directions. Lyra appeared, her wings beating frantically. "Your Highness, we've detected unauthorized ships entering the atmosphere. They're using old Vorax signatures." Kira's blood ran cold. The Vorax, the same species that had attacked during the Great Siege. But they had been defeated, driven back to the edges of known space. What were they doing here now? To her surprise, Marcus immediately stepped forward, all pretense of being just a diplomat falling away. "How many ships? What's their approach vector?" Lyra blinked, startled by his authoritative tone, but answered quickly. "3 cruisers, coming in from the dark side of the third moon. They're trying to stay in the sensor shadow." "Classic Vorax tactics," Marcus muttered, then caught himself and added, "According to historical records, of course." But Kira had seen it, the flash of recognition, the instant shift from diplomat to warrior. In that moment, she knew without a doubt that this was the same person who had saved her all those years ago. The question was, why had he hidden it for so long? The palace defense systems activated, shields shimming into place as evacuation protocols began. But instead of following the guards to the secure bunker, Marcus turned to Kira with an intensity that matched her memories of that frightened but determined child from 15 years ago. "Your Highness, I know a safer way out. The old maintenance tunnels beneath the East Wing. They're not on any modern maps, but they lead directly to the underground shelter complex." "How could you possibly know about those?" Lyra demanded. "Those tunnels were sealed after the Great Siege." "Because I used them before," Marcus replied, finally dropping the diplomatic facade, "when I got her to safety during the first attack. And I'll do it again if I have to." The admission hung in the air between them as explosions rocked the palace. Kira looked at him, really looked at him, and saw both the child who had saved her and the man who had spent years working his way back to her world. "Why?" she asked. "Why did you come back?" Marcus's expression softened, even as his posture remained alert and ready for action. "Because I made a promise to myself that day, that I would find a way to protect you and your people properly, not just in one desperate moment, but through real, lasting change. That's why I became a diplomat, to help prevent another siege from ever happening." More explosions rattled the crystal walls. There was no more time for questions. Kira made her decision, trusting both her memories and her instincts. "Lead the way." As they raced through the palace corridors, Marcus's knowledge of the layout proved flawless. He guided them through forgotten passages and hidden doorways, moving with the certainty of someone who had spent years memorizing every detail. Lyra followed, her initial suspicion giving way to grudging respect as Marcus's shortcuts kept them ahead of the chaos. The maintenance tunnels were exactly where he said they would be, preserved but unused since the last attack. As they made their way through the dimly lit passages, Kira found herself walking beside the living embodiment of her most meaningful childhood memory. She had so many questions, so many things she wanted to say. But they would have to wait. Right now, they had a crisis to handle, one that would test both their newfound trust and their ability to protect their peoples from a threat they had thought long defeated. And as they moved deeper into the underground complex, Kira realized that perhaps this was exactly what they needed. A chance to prove that humans and Aetherians could face any challenge if they stood together. The underground shelter complex hummed with activity as Aetherian officials and human delegates gathered in the emergency command center. Through the crystalline monitoring screens, they watched as the Vorax ships engaged with the planetary defense systems, their attack patterns unnervingly familiar. Kira stood at the central command platform, her iridescent skin pulsing with barely contained energy as she coordinated with her military leaders. Beside her, Marcus had seamlessly transitioned from diplomat to tactical advisor, his knowledge of Vorax strategy proving invaluable. "They're using the same approach vectors as before," Marcus said, his fingers dancing across the holographic display. "But look here." And here, the attack patterns are too perfect, too similar to the Great Siege. This isn't just another Vorax raid. You think someone gave them our old defense data, Kira said, realization dawning. Someone who had access to the historical records. Marcus nodded grimly. The Vorax are brutal, but they're not subtle. This level of tactical precision, they had help. The implications were chilling. A traitor among either the Aetherian court or the human delegation had provided classified information to their old enemy. The timing of the attack, coinciding with the summit, couldn't be coincidence. As if reading her thoughts, Marcus added softly, "This is why I never revealed myself earlier. I knew there were forces working against peace between our peoples. I needed to understand who they were, how deep the corruption went." "You've been investigating all this time?" Kira asked, even as she directed her forces to adjust their defensive positions. "Since the day I left you in the shelter 15 years ago," Marcus confirmed. "I was just a kid then, part of a civilian exchange program that nobody was supposed to know about. When the Vorax attacked, I got lucky, found you in the chaos, and remembered the evacuation routes my mother had helped design." The command center shook as another explosion rocked the surface. Through the monitors, they watched one of the Vorax ships break through the outer defense grid. "Your mother?" Kira asked, putting the pieces together. "She was part of the original diplomatic mission. Lead architect for the palace renovation project," Marcus said, his eyes fixed on the tactical display. "She believed in the possibility of peace between our peoples. After she died in the siege, I promised myself I would finish what she started." The revelation hit Kira hard. She remembered hearing about the human architecture team that had been killed during the attack, but she'd never made the connection. "That's how you knew about the maintenance tunnels. Mom used to take me through them during inspections, said I should always know how to help others find safety." His voice caught slightly. "When the attack came, her last words to me were to protect those who needed it. I didn't understand then that she meant more than just that one day." Their conversation was interrupted by a priority alert. One of the Vorax ships had deployed ground forces near the palace's east wing, directly above their position. "They know we're here," Lyra said, her wings vibrating with tension. "But how?" "Because this was their plan all along," Marcus said, his expression hardening. "They're not here to destroy the palace this time. They're here for something, or someone, specific." The realization struck Kira like a plasma bolt. The summit. All the leaders of both our peoples in one place. Marcus was already moving, pulling up detailed schematics of the shelter complex on the main display. The outer defenses were just a distraction. They're going to try to breach the shelter from above, probably right about. An explosive charge detonated in the ceiling, sending crystalline shards raining down as Vorax shock troops began rappelling into the command center. The guards reacted instantly, energy weapons blazing, but the attackers had the advantage of surprise. Without hesitation, Marcus pulled Kira behind a control panel, his body shielding her from debris. The motion was so similar to that day 15 years ago that for a moment, time seemed to blur. "I need you to trust me," he said, pulling a small device from his diplomatic attire. "What I'm about to do isn't exactly protocol. I've trusted you since I was 7, Kira replied, her own weapon already drawn. "Don't stop surprising me now." Marcus's device emitted a high-frequency pulse that made the crystal walls resonate. The Vorax troops stumbled, their sensitive auditory systems overwhelmed. "Little something I developed, based on Aetherian crystal harmonics. Mom's research." Together, they led the counterattack. Kira's guards rallied around them, and even Lyra joined the fight, her wings creating disruptive air currents that threw off the Vorax targeting systems. The battle was fierce but brief. The attackers hadn't expected such coordinated resistance. As the last Vorax soldier fell, Marcus was already accessing their combat gear, his fingers flying over their equipment. "Just as I thought. These recognition codes, they're diplomatic level. Someone high up in either your court or my delegation provided them. Can you trace them? Kira asked, helping coordinate medical attention for the wounded. Better than that, Marcus replied, a grim smile on his face. I can use them to send a little surprise to their ships. His fingers danced across the captured Vorax equipment, inputting commands with practiced ease. Above them, the 3 attacking ships suddenly began powering down, their systems locked out by their own security protocols. You know, Kira said, watching as her defense forces moved to secure the disabled vessels. For a diplomat, you have some unusual skills. Marcus finally allowed himself to relax slightly, though his eyes never stopped scanning for threats. I figured if I was going to protect you properly this time, I needed to understand everything. Politics, tactics, technology. Took 15 years, but I'd say it was worth it. Kira reached out, her fingers brushing the scar on his hand. All this time, you were working to protect not just me, but both our peoples. Why didn't you ever say anything? Because I needed to be sure I could actually help. Being that kid who saved the princess once wouldn't have been enough. I had to become someone who could make a real difference. He met her gaze steadily. And I needed to be worthy of coming back. The command center was settling into organized chaos as cleanup began and investigations were launched. But for a moment, Kira and Marcus stood in their own quiet space, 15 years of separation finally bridged by understanding. You were always worthy, Kira said softly. But I think I understand now. You didn't just save me that day. You found your purpose. Marcus nodded, then straightened as reports began coming in about the captured Vorax ships. And that purpose isn't finished yet. We still have a traitor to find and a peace to protect. Kira smiled, her skin shimmering with renewed determination. Then let's finish this together, properly this time. In the aftermath of the Vorax attack, the underground command center had been transformed into a makeshift investigation hub. Holographic displays showed communication logs, security footage, and diplomatic records spanning the past 15 years. Kira and Marcus worked side by side, piecing together a conspiracy that had been brewing since the Great Siege. Look at these transmission patterns, Marcus said, highlighting a series of seemingly innocuous diplomatic exchanges. Every major setback in human-Aetherian relations over the past decade was preceded by these encrypted bursts of data. Kira leaned closer, her iridescent skin reflecting off the holographic display. Those frequencies, they're using our old royal emergency channels. Only someone with historical access to the palace systems would even know they existed. Exactly, Marcus replied, his expression grim. Someone's been playing a very long game. The attack today wasn't just about disrupting the summit. It was about maintaining the distrust between our peoples. Lyra, who had been coordinating with security teams, approached with new information. We finished interrogating the captured Vorax soldiers. They claimed they were hired through multiple intermediaries. But here's the interesting part. They were paid with a mixture of human and Aetherian currency. So our traitor has access to both governments, Kira mused, her hand unconsciously moving to touch Marcus's arm. The gesture didn't go unnoticed by Lyra, whose wings flickered with subtle concern. Your Highness, Lyra said carefully, perhaps we should discuss matters of internal security in a more private setting. Kira straightened, her royal training asserting itself. Diplomat Chen has more than proven his loyalty, Lyra. Without him, we would have lost many more lives today. With respect, Your Highness, that's precisely what concerns me. Lyra's wings pulsed with anxiety. His knowledge of our systems, his combat capabilities, his convenient presence during both attacks. It's all too perfect. Marcus stepped back, raising his hands in a gesture of openness. Your suspicion is warranted, Advisor Lyra. In fact, I'd be disappointed if you weren't suspicious. But consider this. If I were the traitor, why would I have spent 15 years working to prevent exactly this type of conflict? Unless that was part of your cover, Lyra countered, though her tone held more uncertainty now. A masterful spy plays the long game. A fair point, Marcus acknowledged. But I can prove my innocence and possibly identify our real traitor. Princess, do you remember what you told me in the shelter during the Great Siege? The last thing you said before I left. Kira's eyes widened as the memory surfaced. I made you promise to come back. And you said. I said I would find a way to protect you that wouldn't require hiding in shelters, Marcus finished. But there was something else. Something only you and I would know. Kira smiled, her skin shimmering with emotion. I gave you my mother's crystal pendant, the one she said would always light the way home. You protested, said it was too valuable, but I insisted that heroes deserved rewards. Marcus reached into his tunic and pulled out a small crystal on a chain. Its surface was scratched and worn, but it still pulsed with a faint inner light. I've carried it every day since then. It's how I found my way back to Etheria, literally. The crystal's resonance helped me understand your technology, your culture. It became my guide in more ways than one. Lyra's suspicion visibly melted, her wings settling into a more relaxed pattern. The Queen's Wayfinder. I remember when it went missing. The official story was that it had been lost in the attack. Because admitting the human child had it would have caused a diplomatic incident. Kira explained. Even then, I understood that much. But now, she took the crystal from Marcus, holding it up to the holographic displays. The light within it pulsed in response to the data streams, creating unexpected patterns in the information flow. Marcus's eyes narrowed. That's interesting. The crystal's responding to specific data packets, almost like it recognizes them. Kira finished. She moved the crystal through different sections of the display, watching as it reacted more strongly to certain transmissions. These are the same frequencies that were used to coordinate the attacks. The Wayfinder crystals were originally used for secure royal communications, Lyra added, her academic knowledge taking over. They're attuned to specific quantum frequencies that only the royal family should know. Unless, Marcus said slowly, someone had access to the original communication protocols. Someone who was part of the palace's inner circle during the renovation project. Someone who would have worked with both humans and Aetherians. Kira's skin paled. Inside the shuttle, warning alarms began to blare. The crystal's resonance was interfering with the vessel's navigation systems, using the very frequencies Ven had stolen against him. The engines sputtered and died as emergency shutdown protocols engaged. Impossible, Ven's voice cracked. Those codes were encrypted. By my mother, Marcus finished. And her work was always about bringing people together, not keeping them apart. The renovation project wasn't just about updating the palace. It was about creating spaces where humans and Aetherians could learn to understand each other. The shuttle's hatch opened with a hiss of hydraulics. Ambassador Ven emerged, his once immaculate diplomatic robes now disheveled. His eyes darted between Kira and Marcus, finally seeing what his prejudices had blinded him to, the living proof that their peoples could not only coexist but strengthen each other. You don't understand what you're doing, he said as guards moved to restrain him. The old divisions exist for a reason. Without them, we can build something new, Kira interrupted. Something better than controlled conflict and manufactured distrust. The very thing you feared most. True cooperation between our peoples is what will finally bring lasting peace. As Ven was led away, Kira turned to Marcus. The Wayfinder crystal's light had softened to a gentle pulse, matching the rhythm of their heartbeats. Your mother would be proud, she said softly. You finished what she started, in more ways than one. Marcus smiled, touching the crystal gently. We both did. That day during the siege, when you gave me this crystal, you didn't just give me a way back. You gave me hope that our peoples could overcome anything if we worked together. Around them, human and Aetherian forces were already working in concert, securing the area and beginning the process of unraveling Ven's network of conspirators. The sight confirmed what they had always believed, that their peoples were stronger united than divided. Lyra approached, her wings shimmering with barely contained excitement. "Your Highness, the Emergency Council is assembling. They're requesting your presence, both of you." It seems the revelation of Ven's betrayal has created an unexpected opportunity. "An opportunity?" Marcus asked. Kira's skin rippled with iridescent hope. "The Council wants to discuss creating a permanent joint security force, humans and Etherians working together to prevent future threats. They're calling it the Unity Initiative." Unity. Marcus tested the word. "I like it. Though I hope this doesn't mean my diplomatic duties are over. I'd grown rather fond of Etherian hospitality." Kira's answering smile held both warmth and promise. "I think we can arrange something. After all, we still have much to learn from each other." As they made their way back to the palace, the three moons of Aetheria cast their light over a world on the brink of change. The crystal spires that had once been a symbol of division now stood as beacons of hope, their rainbow refractions a reminder that the most beautiful things come from the blending of different lights. The story of a human boy who saved an alien princess had evolved into something greater, a testament to the power of trust, the strength of unity, and the endless possibilities that arise when people choose to bridge the gaps between them rather than fortify them. And in the years that followed, when young Aetherians and humans asked about the origins of the Unity Initiative, they would hear the tale of two children who dared to trust each other in a moment of crisis, and the adults they became who turned that trust into a foundation for lasting peace. The Wayfinder crystal, now displayed prominently in the Unity Council chambers, served as a constant reminder that sometimes the best way home is forward together.